Welcome back to the Product-Led Festival. Stay seated because there's another exciting presentation about to start. Before we kick off the next batch of kick-ass content, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us bring this awesome event to your screens. And don't forget, you can access even more incredible content from exclusive articles and interviews to all past and future events on demand, as well as templates and frameworks by becoming a PLA member. Head over to productledalliance.com for more info. Enjoy the next presentation. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next session as part of the Product-Led Festival. It gives me great pleasure to introduce this panel on a topic near and dear to my heart, diversity in product. And I'm delighted to introduce our fantastic moderator for today, Tiama Hansen-Bury, who is the Chief Product Officer at Mina Technologies. So Tiama, welcome and take it away.
Thanks, Heather. We're so happy to be here today. I'm joined with a fantastic group of individuals, and I'm going to say a little bit about each of them. So the first that we've got is Yvette Lepafon. She is a senior product manager at Integral Ad Science, and she brings over 10 years of experience in products, as well as 8 years within the ad tech space. She is also a co-founder of the first ERG at her company, IAS Women. Diversity and inclusion is a topic of great importance to Yvette, and she serves on committees both in and outside of the workplace related to this. Most recently, she's been working as one of the leaders in Black women in product. Yvette, really quickly, what is the most important thing that you want to leave people with personally today?
Yeah, so today I just want to talk about, just including diverse talent in the workplace, but also growing and retaining that talent.
Fantastic. Thank you and welcome. Next on the roster, we have V. V, or Vaibhav, but he goes by V, is a strategist committed to building organizations and technology that address big social, economic, and environmental challenges like equity of opportunity, sustainable growth, and diversity and inclusion. He is currently the product manager for sustainability at Uber, where he builds products that accelerate the transition to zero emissions transportation. He leads the Uber UK social impact team, is a trustee of Eastside Youth, a charity in East London, and is a co-founder of Skylight Ventures, a seed fund for refugee entrepreneurs. V, welcome. What about you? What's the most important thing that you want to leave people with personally today?
Thanks, Emma. I think my thing is how diversity and inclusion is all of our jobs as PMs. It's not just an HR thing. And we hope today we can tell you how to do that.
Awesome. Great lead-in. Okay, next we have Christian. Christian McLean, who has been in the tech industry for almost 22 years, building software professionally for almost a decade before becoming a founder with his wife of 27 years, launching Startup Calgary, which is an entrepreneur-led, volunteer-driven nonprofit with a mission to connect and activate local startups and founders in Canada. Decoder, a boutique product consulting agency, which he bootstrapped and grew to an exit. And Buku, the first body-positive e-commerce and fashion community. Christian is currently the director of product operations at Octane and has worked in products across media, advertising, real estate, and e-com since immigrating to the US 6 years ago. Christian, welcome. And for you, what's the most important thing you want to leave our audience with today?
Hi, Tiama. Thanks for having me. For me, I think it's important to understand that intersectionality isn't always visible and that awareness and understanding of others and your own intersectionality is really key to being a strong and effective ally and advocate for really diverse and inclusive teams and work cultures, but also to building products that serve everybody more effectively.
Beautiful. That's wonderful. And there's some vocab words in there that we're going to tackle in the beginning just so that we can all be intentional with our language. But before we get to it, let's introduce our last and certainly not least participant, which is Aditi. Aditi Sharma is a design thinking champion, and she's got a real passion for agile, user-centered design practices that are aimed at driving inclusivity, sustainability, and innovation. She is currently the Vice President of Digital Experience Design at JPMorgan Chase. And she also serves as a lecturer at the Pratt Institute, facilitating one of the top 10 UI UX design programs in the United States. She was recently featured as an inspirational woman in STEM by Authority Magazine. And in her previous role at Accenture Interactive, she's led design programs for clients such as Walmart, DuPont, Cargill, to name a few. Aditi, same as I've asked the rest of our wonderful panel, what do you think is the most important thing that you want to leave people with today?
Thank you, Tiama. I'm really excited to be here. I think the biggest piece I really want everyone to leave with is that diversity is beyond what's visible. It's also about that invisible bias that we may all go through. So there's one aspect of who I am, but what do I do and what do I stand for? So it's beyond gender and race. So excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here, all of you. For our audience, just to give you an idea of what we'll be doing today, we're going to be talking about a range of topics that we know from the crowdsourcing is important to you as members. We're going to be tackling issues that are important to our panelists, and we're really going to try to push to have an additive conversation to the general question about diversity in products. We're very glad, all of us being passionate about this, that there's been so much focus on this over the last year. And we've all been part of a lot of those conversations. We've really tried to work on some content that's going to add to that conversation today, and we hope that you find that useful. We will be speaking for the next 40 minutes or so, and then at about the hour mark, we will open up a panel quiz, and we'll ask our audience how they'd like us to spend the last 15 minutes. Okay, so one of the first things that we wanted to do today was be really intentional about our language. Language, you can't take assumptions about what we mean by things. And so there's some key concepts that we wanted to cover off today. Christian, when we say diversity, what should our audience think we're talking about there? Oh, do we have Christian? Hold on. Have we lost him? Let's move to inclusion, Yvette. And let's have you give us what we mean by inclusion while I look for Christian.
Thanks for asking that question. I think by inclusion, we mean making sure our team is diverse. So as Aditi notion too, is not just diversity in the way that we look, but also in how we think. A lot of what we'll focus on today as well is just inclusion and diversity within the product lifecycle. And as you get different people from different backgrounds, different trains of thoughts, you're able to bring those ideas into the life cycle development and have diverse thought there as well.
That's wonderful, Yvette. Thank you. Representation. V, what do we mean when we say representation?
Thanks, Yama. I think representation just builds on the idea of diversity, and it's what specifically for the organization that you run and the community that you are part of, what does diversity for you need to look like? So as Uber, for example, we need to have people on our team who understand what the life of a driver actually looks like. And so that's the kind of, as I said, there are different dimensions of diversity. So it's about which dimensions you need to encompass to ensure that your diversity actually adds value.
Fantastic. And Christian, now that we've got you back, how would you define diversity?
Yeah, to me, diversity is really about understanding the range of different cultures, political views, religions, genders, sexualities, things like that people bring to a community, and about recognizing that range. I think it's important to also understand that diversity is about the non-visible aspects of that. So it's that full range of different identities that people have.
Excellent. Aditi, when we were talking about this, one of the areas we really wanted to cover was the concept of equity. How would you help our audience think about that?
Yeah, I'll just sort of build on everything that everyone just talked about here around diversity and inclusion. And my definition of equity really comes from the place of empowering someone else. And there's a funny story around equity, a very quick story, where when I was growing up, my father always worked with Indian cooperatives. And one of their slogans used to be, each according to his need and each according to their capacity. So it's not really about equality. We often confuse equity with equality. Equality means that everything is divided equally. And equity, on the other hand, really means that you are providing resources to someone based on their circumstances and opportunities so that everyone can derive or get to an equal outcome. So yeah, that's what I would say is my definition of equity.
I love it, and I think it's a great concept that people can definitely understand. When it comes to building a sense of belonging, what does that mean for you, Christian?
Yeah, I think to me, belonging is really about three different parts. Belonging is about having a place where you fit, right? So that community or work environment or space that you're part of has a place for you, right? So that sense. It's also an action verb, though. I think it's about having a feeling of acceptance and identity and connectedness and being a member of that group or community. And I think it's about taking that step because there's a seat at the table for you, right? But there's also an emotional outcome, I think, that's part of belonging. It's really about letting people connect with a sense of purpose at work or in their community that they belong to, and lets them bring their authentic selves to those spaces. So I think it's really kind of three different facets.
Excellent, excellent. Now, Yvette, what do you say about sponsorship?
So my idea of sponsorship, I think it's important to call out that sponsorship and mentorship are two different things. I think when we think of mentorship, we think of that one-on-one mentor connection with someone. But when we think about sponsorship, that's that person who you can learn from, that person who's already made it in a space and can help you get to that next level.
Excellent. Obviously, Yvette kind of said there's a one-to-one element, but is there anything that you would add to the definition of mentorship and to help contrast it against sponsorship?
Yeah, so I think of mentorship, that's someone who's taken the time out to give you that guidance. And sponsorship can be something that is not necessarily noticed or called out specifically that this person or group of people are sponsoring you. I think that's the key difference there, is that you can learn for someone without them even knowing, and they in turn can be a sponsor for you.
Fantastic. Okay, perfect. And then last, don't worry, we're not going to go through vocabulary all day. Psychological safety. Aditi, walk us through why we thought that was such a core concept to cover here.
Yeah, to me, as a designer and other folks that I collaborate with as we are building products, psychological safety is so important. And I'll build on to what Christian said about belonging. So to me, it's really about fostering an environment where the communication is open, it's free, and it's inclusive. It's really about having the psychological space outside your own self, where one does not feel the pressure to get it right every time. And you may come from different backgrounds, but it's really about feeling safe, being open about what you believe in, really showcasing your authentic self. And I would say when I'm within this psychologically safe team, I really feel that overall the team members feel seen, accepted, and respected. So that's something that's so important to feel psychologically safe with any work environment.
Yeah, well, and I think what really, when I was first starting to think and put into words why these concepts have always been so important to me as a product leader, psychological safety was one of the most important ones, because my teams couldn't create if they didn't have psychological safety, right? So it's a nice lead into, why do we think diversity in product is important, right? You'll notice that there's no HR professionals on this discussion, right? This is a bunch of product leaders. And so what we're going to dive into next is kind of the concept of why this matters. And there's the table stakes answer, if you want to be, a bit glib about it, because we do believe at this point it's kind of a table stakes requirement. But also we really want to dive into making the case for why it helps you build better products, so that our audience understands that, they can take that back and they can leverage for that internally. And then why we think it's essential to your job as a product manager in this day and age. So when we think about it as kind of a table stake, I'm interested, what would you say is one of the reasons why it needs to be there, like as a default?
Yeah, I think to call out the obvious, I think it's important to say I work for Uber, which, much as I love it, at a time had a a deservedly poor reputation as far as diversity and inclusion went. And there were, I think, to answer your question, Tama, the reason why it's important and why it is a bit of a table stakes thing at the moment is because product is a people business, it's a talent business. You're not going to be able to attract good talent if, as an organization or as a leader, if there's any hint of a reputation for a sort of toxic or uninclusive behavior. I back in 2017 swore I'd never worked for Uber, and then I'd sort of challenged myself on that, but it took some real change to get to a point where I was comfortable doing that. And I think it's important when we hear about organizations these days. People are watching, and people are sort of evaluating what it means for them to consider themselves at a company. And through potentially even small missteps, you can hamper them seeing themselves in that sense of belonging that Christian and as you talked about in your organization.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are thinking about how diverse their customer set is and how important it is to reflect that, but it's equally important to your employee base, right? Nobody wants to go work for a company where they're going to feel like they don't belong, right? And that they're not going to be able to bring their whole selves to work. So I really get that. In fact, would you add anything to the table stakes concept? I know you're passionate about it. It's not just getting them in the door, right?
Yes, and Tam, I think you touched on that, and just being able to be able to bring your whole self to work. I think you are only encouraged to do that when you see diversity around you and you feel like it's welcomed. So I think that concept of belonging is key for sure.
Okay, perfect. So that's kind of the basics, right? We're saying, a table stakes, without it, you're not going to be able to attract or retain good talent, and you're not going to be able to harness the power of that good talent because they won't be there, right? But then let's jump into why we think it helps you build better products. Aditi, I'd love to hear kind of your take on that first, and then we'll go to Christian.
And you're asking a user researcher this question. So I'll definitely go and talk about, right, like beyond what's visible. When we are starting some discovery or generative research, when we are kicking off, say, a project with the product team, it's really critical to not just focus on their roles in the organization. It's really about understanding different psychological triggers that may be affecting them, or how they are using the product, or how they might perceive our product. So there's different triggers, and I'll talk more about this in my keynote later today, but really looking at the behavioral triggers. What's easy to them? What's a part of their jobs every day? They may not say something because they feel the pressure to be reprimanded. Maybe they are giving us this interview in front of their manager. They're not safe, psychologically safe. So really understanding what's easy to them. Then what's the moment of truth for them? So what does the environment look like around them? What's happening around them? Who's influencing them? Really empathizing with them. And I know that empathy is such an overused term now. We really have to move beyond empathy and look at compassion, where I do something for someone else without having this need to, get some incentive in return. So really thinking about compassion, looking at their moments of truth. And then at the end, if we sort of sum it all, what really motivates them? So how do we talk to them? What sort of conversations do we have? How am I framing questions when I'm asking them what they need? I feel like at a practical level, we really need to involve this diversity in thought. And once you've involved that, it's also important to bring it from that discovery phase into that creation phase, where I almost use these as principles to guide how I build the product. And then at the end, when I start to measure the success of this product, I use similar constructs from the personas that I just created. So it's that overall end-to-end process, I would say, really going beyond the obvious, going beyond the numbers. We are so driven by numbers and metrics now. It's really about adding that human element to understanding who you're designing for.
I love that. And as you guys know, we're going to dive into some success stories that talk about bringing it across the entire product lifecycle. So I look forward to kind of continuing in that vein. Christian, Aditi's just given us definitely her perspective on this, on building better products, and she's bringing obviously a human-centered design point of view. Anything that you would add based on your unique background and kind of what you've found to be important?
Yeah, absolutely. Not to be too heady about it, but I think a lot of building better products really comes with self-understanding and self-acceptance, and really starts there. So not to call out the obvious, but I'm a middle-aged white guy in tech, right? So maybe not known as the most self-reflective or self-aware group of people, and certainly a privileged one, right? But later in life, I really dealt with mental health issues, discovered some of my own neurodiversity, immigrated to the US, which gave me a different perspective, and became the parent of a trans teen, which gave me a really different set of perspectives. And so for me, the only way I could really wrap my head around the fact that I live in this world of a really strong set of privileges, but they're offset by these sometimes really jarring, at least to a privileged white dude like me, these different set of identities I was trying to integrate in was through recognizing that everybody has these sets of intersectionalities, the things that go on in their lives or the challenges that they have that don't necessarily surface or aren't understood. And I think the more you start to understand that about yourself, the more you start to relate to other people in the rest of the world in that way, and the more you start to recognize that exists in other places, and it forces you to do a few things as a product manager. For me, first of all, I had to become a better listener, right? I felt like I'd done a good job in building a body positive community for women with my wife and co-founder in understanding some of the problems that women had, but I certainly had a lot of work to do in my listening skills. So working on that came from really, really recognizing that, wow, there's things that I don't know about people and users that I need to learn more. It taught me how to have more difficult conversations and ask deeper questions in a really constructive way. Understanding the challenges my daughter was going through, having conversations about gender and identity, having people ask me questions and trying to convey in a constructive way what I'd learned really taught me a lot about how to have those conversations. And then, that really helped me understand how to understand people's problems more completely. And I think that does make you a much better PM. To build on what Aditi said, even some of the user research now that we've done at work, as we start to think that way, is causing us to dig deeper into motivations as well as jobs to be done, right? We're trying to understand things. One of the personas we have is Sarah Side Hustle, right? And so we want to go deeper and say, like, okay, Sarah is starting a business. Why? What is it that motivates it? Is it a lack of belonging at her current job? Is it limitations that she might have in earning potential? Is it a sense of self-control? What are the things that she needs and what motivates her to want to grow her business, and how can we help? And I think ultimately that's what product management is about, is identifying those problems and solving them in ways that are constructive. So yeah, that's it's important. I think it's very important.
I love it. I bet you not everybody who joined us today realized they were going to get some homework to go off and do self-reflection and understand themselves. But I think that it's a good thing that you've done, right? So, and I absolutely agree, because until you realize the struggles that you yourself are dealing with and come to terms with those, it's really difficult to even assume how many others people are carrying and the ways that relate to, again, serving value, which is our job, right, as PMs. So lovely. Okay. We've kind of gotten into this just naturally, but the next question that I would say is, why is it essential to your job as a PM? So beyond what Christian has just kind of covered, Yvette, do you have other thoughts around why diversity is essential as a PM, right, for people on your teams and for you yourself when you've acted as a PM?
Definitely. I think it comes into play when you're thinking about the products that you're building, right? As we touched on, you're building your products for a diverse group of people at times. And if you have one train of thought, it kind of limits the potential for your actual product. The example that I can think of is just in AI and machine learning. A lot of what goes into it is the ideas from the people who actually work at the company. So if your team isn't diverse, by nature, your product is not going to be diverse, and it's not going to be able to meet the needs of the end users.
Yeah, great example. V, what about you? Other ways that you've seen how important this is to the role as a PM today?
Yeah, I think it's diversity as a PM helps you in a lot of things, right? I think there's two dimensions to it. We talked about the customer dimension. There's also the team dimension. I think by ensuring that you have a sufficiently broad set of viewpoints and backgrounds as part of the team that's building the product, as Yvette mentioned, you're going to miss out on a lot of blind spots. So certainly there's a risk avoidance element to it, but you're also going to see a lot of opportunities that you would not have otherwise seen. And I think that's kind of the beauty of building products, right? You're out there because you want to make things that people find usable, and having a more diverse set of viewpoints into that input will help you really understand what those set of usable things are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that. And one of the things that we wanted to do today was not only talk kind of theoretically, right, but let's actually take a step back and say that I think all of us had a shared objective of one of the things that we would like everybody who's here today to think about how diversity plays a role across your product life cycle, right? There is the, discovery phase, which, is happening in the ideation and understanding of the problem to solve and the target, the vision and strategy and all of that. There's the delivery phase, and then there's the optimization phase. And what we thought would be fun is to talk about some of the success stories that our panel has had when making intentional efforts to build diversity into each of those steps, right? So, I think one of the first things that I would ask is to Yvette in terms of why have you learned that that's so important? Right? Why have you learned that thinking about discovery, delivery, optimization holistically, and how diversity plays a role, why has that been important to you?
Yeah, so I think it's important in thinking about it as part of the life cycle when thinking of the actual product and the users who are going to be using it. And my specific example, I work for a global company. So our product is not just for our clients in the US, it's for our clients in EMEA or in APAC. So in thinking of diversity there, I can't just focus on one subset of customers, one thought of thinking. You need to, in thinking about product, you need to design for everyone. And that's at every part of the life cycle development, as you pointed out. So it's important to not just focus on the ideas and having diversity in the beginning in the user exploration phase, but also when you're thinking of optimizing it, okay, so you built a product, now let's optimize it. Let's make sure that we get feedback from these clients across, the different geos, but also from diversity of thought from the different teams that work on it.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's hear some success stories. Christian, where have you had success across the life cycle?
Sorry, could you repeat that? You cut out for a second.
I just said, let's talk about some of the success stories, and I'd love to hear yours on where you've had success building diversity and across the life cycle.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting. So at Octane, we've gone through a really explosive growth. I mean, part of that's been fueled by the fact that e-commerce has grown like crazy. As well, we combined really 4 different companies into one over this last year and grew the product team from a relatively small group to quite a large one. So there's quite a bit of hiring that happened. And really in trying to hire, and intentionally going out and trying to build a balanced team that had strong representation, a lot of what we looked at was thinking beyond, if we're hiring for people that have a background in logistics and e-commerce exclusively, are we going to miss that small business owner point of view? Are we going to miss an understanding of what the needs of a small, medium, large, all the way through to enterprise e-commerce business, what their needs might be. And so in hiring and bringing people in, I think what we've seen more and more is there's a viewpoint of and a focus on, not to steal from upcoming conversations around the discovery phase, but we're going through such a massive shift in those early phases of determining which products align best with which users and what their needs are. I feel like the hiring process has driven a ton of the early wins that we've had in building new features and getting them out the door, at least through the alpha phase is what we have. And to touch on what Yvette said, because we've been doing a lot of global expansion as well, it's been a huge shift in thinking, being a US-centric company. And I think a lot of bringing in that representation from different viewpoints and backgrounds of people outside of the US has really shifted a lot of that focus away, even down to how do we launch? When we launch a new feature, do we want to launch just in the US? Can we do better by launching in another country? And what's our scaling plan as a result of that? So it's been interesting, even early stages, for us to start to incorporate that in.
Yeah, I think that's something that will probably be super useful for our audience, because so many of us, thanks to the digitalization that's happened over, the last year, they're starting to think about a much broader audience, because suddenly they can offer services that are outside of maybe their existing market. So that, I think that'll play well. Aditi, tell us the story about, discovery and user research that you've had success in deploying diversity.
Yeah, I have multiple stories, but I think I just want to start with what Christian and Yvette just said. Definitely having diverse locations is one of the problems. One of the other problems is that I may have a smaller business and then I may move up all the way to an enterprise platform. So how does that change? So those are different kinds of changes that may happen, but I feel like one of the most common problems that we all run into is just analyzing these heaps of generative research data. We don't usually get a clear direction around product requirements sometimes, because say one location may be giving you a very different need set. For example, what Yvette was saying, some users in APAC may use this product very differently from some users in EMEA. So they come from role-based persona needs. But if we really try and push it beyond the role-based persona need and start to think about their preferences, any limitations or specific needs that may be around compliance. For example, I go through that at JP Morgan a lot. But without going into any specifics, I'll talk about this other service design program for a multinational corporation that I was leading a few years back. And we traveled across the globe and started to uncover these subtle nuances in how people worked or behaved in a work environment. And as they would work, the overall workflow, the product use, what their needs were, how they shut down after work, how did they come back and sort of work with each other, their handoffs, all of that was impacted by the kind of person they were. Instead of just being a role, they started to be people. And when you start to put this behavioral and attitudinal data together, you start to get a really better picture of what that persona is. And that matrix can be spread across these locations. So that's what we started to do. We started to look at, okay, one thing is that, hey, I'm a manager, I'm an analyst, I'm a supervisor. I may be a different role in the company, but as a person, my personality drives me to be type A. So I'm really organized, and I'd like to be notified around what's happening with my request at this specific time. So that nuance in my product development started to come from that mapping across the organization. We did more than 200 user interviews. We traveled a lot. That was great. I missed that. But after coming back and sort of testing it with these pilot users, we came up with these layouts in views and we started to test them. And we learned more around the flexibility of these workspaces that we could create in our user interface. Till today, I feel like it's one of the most successful products that this company has for their employee experience. Because in terms of the metrics as well, I'll push it a layer further. I was just reading one of the questions from the audience just around which metrics should we be looking at when it comes to diversity. And I feel like the kind of metrics we go after are, say, CSAT. I want to see my satisfaction scores. Or we are looking at NPS. Is someone else going to promote my product? But we really want to go beyond that and, again, connect it back to the whole aspect of a behavioral or motivational trigger. Is it easy for me to use? So customer effort score, I think it's much more valuable than just a satisfaction score, because that's how we think. We are lazy. We want to get stuff done quickly. So I think metrics like that really helped us measure what we were creating. And this is why I feel like diversity needs to be present, not just at the discovery stage, but also how you articulate your visual artifact and then continue to build the product and measure its performance. So it goes all along that process.
That's excellent. Dee, you had a really fun example of how you've been able to have some real success in the kind of post-launch and optimization, right? And how that's driven ongoing innovation. So what was your story? Share it with the rest of us.
Yeah, so as a PM, I think one of the maxims I try and live by is that I know nothing. I know especially nothing when it comes to how my users are going to use my product until they start using it. That is the only time you can start to get some comfort in what you're thinking and your strategy. So, for instance, a few years back, we had this example at Uber where we had our premium products, like the nicer cars, the sort of very luxurious branding, etc. And we had a customer in mind for that, and it was basically, with some apologies to Christian, a middle-aged white dude with like an executive job in a suit, used to getting driven around, right? One of the interesting things we noticed as we actually plugged into the data post-launch was that many of our users were women. I think, again, he was paused like, oh yeah, of course women can be executives too, sure. But actually when we funded it further, when we actually discussed it with the team, went deeper into the research, we found that actually a lot of the positioning for those premium products were around, very experienced drivers, very professional drivers, for example, especially in the US where these things are slightly more defined. And actually, basically, we realized that there were a lot of users out there, women who were using these more premium products as a signal for safety, as a signal for higher trustworthiness. And obviously, safety is a crucial pillar to everything Uber does. We talk about it a lot, but we've made mistakes and we've learned from them through instances like this. And I think it's the fact that we have a team that helps us remember things like this. You can really see that in the data. It doesn't come to everyone just instantaneously. So that's my sort of funny story for why you should never assume what your users are going to look like until you can see them use the product. And again, it becomes much easier to not make those assumptions if you have a diverse team building the product in the first place.
And Vaibhav, just to quickly add, I'm definitely one of the personas for that. See, and because as a consultant, I used to travel a lot, and I would travel at odd times. So even getting that luxury was a safety thing for me. So I completely get that. Thank you for sharing that.
Excellent. Okay, so next we're going to move a little bit into the diverse employees and hiring them, retaining them, promoting them, right? So we've talked a little bit about the importance of this so far. Yvette, I know this is an area of real passion for you. So, in terms of what we want to leave our audience with, and I think we actually have a question that's come in from the channel already, which is around how do you seek this for hiring? Talk to us a little bit about, the importance there and how people should take this away and think about it.
Definitely. I think the first step in attracting diverse talent is just looking at the job description. One of the first things we did at our first ERG at the company was making sure that the role was inclusive, that we had a little statement at the end that said our company is inclusive and called out all the different groups, and we encourage people to apply. I think that's the first step in just making sure that you can attract diverse talent, just showing that overall your company is inclusive. The next thing is for product roles. We see a lot of roles that require like some sort of advanced degree or a computer science degree or something in tech. That in itself can be a little limiting in that they're not thinking of global schools or even some smaller schools that don't offer such programs. You're then excluding a lot of people from applying to the role. So just making sure overall that the role itself is inclusive. We've seen that there's no evidence that having that technical degree makes you a better product manager. So just in thinking about all those things from the role perspective. Then when it comes to actually the first step of hiring that employee, but then also once they're in the door, making sure that they have the support to grow and continue to advance in their career, whether that be in the form of trainings or being able to go to a conference. These type of things are small, don't really affect like company budget or bottom dollar, but they do show the employee that you're invested in them, and you're working toward helping them to develop the skills to be able to develop in their career and then get to the next step, being promoted.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you so much. One of the other areas we wanted to cover before we go to the panel quiz is talking about diversity, right? And this is something we all spoke about, and talking about diversity, talking about the underlying concepts, the relational concepts. Christian, I know that this is something close to your heart and VU as well. I'm going to start with you, Christian, on kind of any tips on how to create a welcome and inclusive environment, right?
Yeah, in terms of when you start having those conversations, it's been interesting. I actually, in preparing for this, reached out to some of the people that I'd hired that I had intentionally in the hiring process, added some conversation points in around, hey, if you look at our website, you'll see that a lot of the faces on the leadership team are white and male. And I want you to understand, as a young woman that I'm interviewing for this role, that the product team is really actively trying to change that balance in the organization, and these are the steps that we're taking. So, starting right out of the gate with a conversation that might seem a little bit awkward, but is really about calling out that, hey, this is something that we acknowledge. This is a reality. It's not a negative per se. It's something that we're all working towards. I think sets a stage for a product team and building that psychological safety where you feel like, oh, okay, this is a group of people that I can potentially come in and ask questions to, or I can challenge, or I can start to ask questions of that typically wouldn't be things that we would acknowledge, right? So having those conversations up front and leading with acknowledgement of situations, I think, drives a lot of authenticity, a lot of psychological safety, and opens the door for difficult conversations in the team, and creates a space for you to learn what's the right language to use. How do you ask difficult questions? How do you provide constructive feedback? How do you make mistakes, right? We know as PMs, a lot of times what you're trying to do is fail fast, right? And I think, it's a combination of those things that really create an environment where people are more apt to bring that diversity of self, and you're more apt to hire and retain people that don't fit, to Yvette's point, the sort of typical or prototypical notion of the right person to hire in a product team, right? So it's interesting because it opens up a lot of conversations, and that tends to spill over into understanding users and being a better manager and being a better leader in the company. And, I think those are important, but it's a day one thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And B, so that's very much around kind of the product team environment. What about taking it from a different angle, right? How do you advise people to have kind of conversations with management and leadership around why being an inclusive manager is required to be a good manager, right?
I think it's brilliant that Christian used the sort of opening the door metaphor, because it's one I use a lot. So as a manager, I've had stories, unfortunate stories, where, to put it mildly, members of my team have come to me and told me about situations where they were made to feel uncomfortable by, say, clients that we were working for, environments that they were part of by virtue of the work that they were doing for our team, right? And from talking to them and facing a few of the situations, I know the most daunting moment is when you made up your mind to tell somebody about it, to share that difficult story, put yourself in that very vulnerable place. But the most daunting moment is when you're standing in front of the door and you're about to knock and you're going like, am I sure I want to do this? And that metaphor literally and metaphorically is really powerful, because it is a manager's job. It's part of being I think one of the things that's really important for all managers and all leaders to realize is that being a good manager and being an inclusive manager are not in any way separate. They are both the same thing, because as a manager, you're there to serve your team. You
Yes.
cannot serve their needs well unless you understand them, unless you kind of give yourself to them in a very, in a very personal way. And so I think that's the critic, and that means, just like you're not going to be great at your job as a product manager or your job as a team manager on day one, you might not be great at your job as an inclusive manager for day one. But it doesn't stop that being part of what you do, and it should be something that you care about and you focus on and you try to do more and more of as you grow through the company. And just like good managers get a reputation and are able to attract talent, and inclusive managers do as well. And suddenly the snowball takes care of itself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think having experienced similar situations where I've had team members, not in the organization I'm in now, I'm proud to say, but in other places I've worked where,
Likewise.
they're looking for allyship or advocacy at a leadership level or at an HR level because they were uncomfortable having these conversations, and realizing that as a leader that inclusiveness and those difficult conversations are important to have so that you can go out and really try and represent your team better and create the environment you want to be part of is really, really important. So, I applaud you for that, by the way. I think those are hard. When you're about to knock, it is. I've had that, and you feel like you're going to put yourself out there for your team, but it's the right thing to do. And I think people really do appreciate that, or at least that's the feedback I've gotten.
And just to, I loved what both of you said. And I feel like we need to be vulnerable as well. It's okay for you to be vulnerable. It's okay for you to say,
Yep.
you know what, I'm still learning about this, but I really have the best intentions here.
Right.
So it's all about growth. It's all about self-awareness, as Christian, you were saying. So again, like it should be the same thing, right? Inclusive manager equals a good manager. And if you don't have that, then you're not a good manager. Then you can always learn to be a better manager.
I think if people understand you're coming from a spot of trying to understand, I think at the end of the day, those difficult conversations become a lot easier. And if you've been authentic,
Mm-hmm.
I think also just to
Well,
add,
and I think it's something.
Sorry, guys, just wanted to add one last thing, which is, I think as a manager in our work, we understand that you're not expected to have all the answers. So my big hack trick for being an inclusive manager is don't try and figure it out yourself. If you want to know how to include a team member, ask them.
Yes.
This is the easiest freaking thing in the book. It's actually kind of joyously easy because it takes away the pressure entirely. Ask somebody, for example, like it's a simple example, but like what pronouns they prefer to use.
Yes.
Nobody hates the question.
No one.
Ever. So ask them that. Ask, if they're, let's say, a more introverted team member, ask them how they'd like to be included in team discussions. If there's a cultural or celebratory event, like ask them, what that means to them and what they'd like to do about it. It's the simplest thing, and it actually just takes away all the pressure.
I've made a habit of putting it on name tags at events, and it norms things for people and creates an environment where people are comfortable, and it becomes just a normal part of the conversation. And thank you for that on behalf of my daughter, because those type of things are really important for her.
Fantastic. That was obviously a really hot button area, and I think you guys gave some really good feedback. I think all of our managers on the phone really should reflect on, what do you think your team feels when they come to your door, right? Is there that hesitation? Is there that fear? And if you also feel that for your manager, right? Share this concept with them. I think it's something that's very, it's easy to envision and understand, right? And identify and empathize with. So, okay, well, we are going to post a poll right now because we want to be inclusive of our audience and talk about the things that matter to them. So Heather, let's go ahead and put that poll up.
There's so much to talk about here. I feel like we can go on.
Oh yeah, I think we can. We definitely can. Let's hear. I think Heather's going to give it one more minute, and we'll see what the data says, and then we'll go.
I'm gonna. So then it's D. I don't mind. So it was D and I and the W%. So between those two.
I am encrypted. Let's see here. Heather, is that you? Okay, I'm gonna see. That may have been Heather speaking to us through a noise translator. Heather, we couldn't quite understand you, so why don't you just tell us in the poll what was the answer?
Can you?
Wouldn't be a proper virtual conference without a technical glitch.
Exactly. Although I do feel like we're bringing in, a robot or something. So.
This is gotten more interesting.
Okay. So while we wait for Heather to tell us the answer, I'm going to serve up one of the myths that we talked about busting. So we thought if we had time today, we would pick some of the myths that are out there and that we want to go and help you guys then go and tackle. So the first one is diversity is not just about race or gender. Aditi, what would you say to that?
I completely agree. I think that's the biggest takeaway I wanted to share with everybody today, because I have numerous personal stories that I've gone through. People perceive me in a specific way, and I've had the good fortune to work with some amazing designers and run some amazing workshops around inclusion and diversity, where I've asked my participants to really push out of what they usually see me as and see themselves as, and really represent themselves as how they want to be seen and heard. So I feel like it's the biggest takeaway. Couldn't agree more. Please look beyond what's apparent to you. There's a deeper person, there's a deeper emotion for that person as well. So again, be compassionate if you can't empathize. Okay.
I would just maybe add to that. I think I've also found that perspective to be quite useful when talking to people who wouldn't normally think of themselves as having a stake in diversity. So again, a random example, but when I was trying to describe to one of my managers once what it a particular circumstance, what it felt like to be the only person of color walking into a room, or what I've heard about what it feels like to be the only woman walking into a room. And I asked them, have you ever walked into a room of everybody is just ridiculously tall and athletic, and everybody's basically like an NBA star, and you're just sitting there as a normal person going, how did I end up here? Imagine that just every time, and it's about your job. That intense level of vulnerability. So I find that to be a useful sort of communication tool almost in helping people understand it is all dimensions, and you're part of the minority in some groups, even though you might be the majority in some others.
And it's about everybody as well, right? Like what Christian, you had said before earlier on. It's about everybody. Everyone can be a part of it. And it does affect the bottom line. It's not just about looking good on paper. It's really about driving that financial impact as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. That kind of relates to something that I hear so often, right? Well, D&I is about HR, right? It's an HR thing, right? So how would you challenge that, D? Is that a myth that we need to bust?
Oh, hell yes, to put it mildly. I think I find this to be a relatively easy topic to approach in the case of like startup organizations. So let me start there. Lots of CEOs will tell you that startup CEOs will tell you they are basically the CPO. They are also the chief hiring and people officer. I would then add to that, if you're all of those things, you're also the chief diversity officer. You can't sort of extricate that responsibility and put it in this white tower of the D&I team of people who will go to conferences and tell you what the right answer is. It actually, in a way, creates more insularity. We need everybody going and obsessing about what it means to them. So, Aditya, you mentioned metrics earlier. How diverse your team is should be one of your metrics, and you should obsess about it the same way as you obsess about everything else. And suddenly, it stops being a thing that HR kind of beats you with a stick over. It becomes part of what makes you really good at your job. And it just, there's a beauty to a well-run team that I'm sure all managers in this call know. It's a very palpable feeling. And when you really get that humming, when everybody feels like they can be themselves, can input in the right way, it creates results that you can't see. And just like it's not HR's job to deliver business results, and as I said, diversity is certainly a business result, just take it on and do it as well as you do everything else.
I agree. From that perspective, I think it's interesting because I think it's easy to confuse career advancement and skills development within a team as a manager with HR. I think they're significantly different. And I think, within our team, one of the first things we tried to do is build a clear set of expectations within the team about what skills and abilities people should have to advance so that we could create a level playing field for everybody and that we could quantify people's growth and contributions so that we could have more meaningful conversations to then talk with COOs, talk with CEOs about things like compensation and create a lot more equality in level setting, especially in an organization. We like to think of ourselves as being very permeable so people can move up into product from support, for example. But that means that there's going to be some pay gaps that need to be addressed, things like that. What's the framework? How do you do those things in a way that allows you to mentor people, to sponsor them into growth opportunities and then lead to things like solving pay gaps. And I think normally that's perceived as being something that's a framework that exists outside of a product team or an individual team that I think needs to be brought inside so that you can have those conversations regularly, so that you can invest in people accordingly, so that you can expect better outcomes by giving them better input. And I think as much as leadership in HR, it's important to do that. There's blind spots in any organization, and I think your job is to really offset those blind spots within the team.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the most important things that's been said is it is a business objective, right? Diversity, inclusivity, sense of belonging, we should make that a business objective because we know that it ties to better financial performance. We know that it ties to better retention, lower churn of our employees. And so everybody should own it by understanding how it impacts their role, right? HR has a very specific set of skills to help to make this part of the framework. But, product has a very important role as well. Managers across every function have a role, right?
I think if it becomes an HR, it's a little too late, in my opinion.
I think that's exactly right. I think the job of the HR function is to create almost the lowest common denominator version, the version that will just protect the business from terrible things happening and protect people from terrible things happening to them. It will sort of set the floor, but there will be it'll be a foundation that you need to build on top of it as part of your own teams.
They're almost enablers as well, right? Like one is that something should go wrong or something should break down. Like definitely that, but I feel like, and my sister is in HR, so she's going to love me for saying this, that I feel like HR can also empower the organization to do the right things, to bring these concepts. It's a shared responsibility, but they can be almost the early adopters to make sure that everyone can say why diversity is important to them. So yeah, I feel like it's shared with everyone. Tiama, like I feel like we've been cracking the timeline a little bit. So
No, I definitely
Yeah,
want
no, but we're
completely agree
oh
with
yeah.
everything
Go
that was
ahead.
said. I think that it's important that it's a company-wide initiative, and it shouldn't fall on like one specific group or one specific individual. I think, especially with everything that's happened in the U.S. in the past year, we've seen a lot of companies include a chief diversity and inclusion officer role, and a lot of times they would put in someone of color into this role, but the rest of the executive board is not diverse. It doesn't solve the problem. I think that it has to be everyone in the company. Especially when we're thinking of employee resource groups. That's supposed to be like a safe space for employees. It's not necessarily meant to be the voice for that group of people. So I think that's key. And once companies realize that, they create a more inclusive place for everyone.
Brilliantly said.
well said. Yeah.
Very well said.
We can't hear you anymore.
We can't hear you, Tim.
Now?
Rich too. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh no, I was going to say, now the technology is failing. Okay, what I was going to say is that we're going to do one last myth that we're going to bust. We recognize that we're staying over a little bit. For those of you who can't stay, we will miss you. But the last one is worth hearing, in my opinion. And it's the idea that diversity includes everyone, and everyone should be equally treated or equally accounted for. And Yvette, I'd love your thoughts on that. Is that right? Is that wrong from your point of view, and why?
Well, can you repeat the question? Is it everyone is created equally or not?
That everyone is treated equally.
Got it. So yeah, I definitely disagree with that statement. I don't think everyone is treated equally, at least not where things stand in companies now. And I think that's why a lot of the changes are occurring. Companies are realizing that they need diversity and inclusion and need to figure out what that looks like within their space. I think as we continue to develop, things that I touched on before, so making sure that your entire executive suite is diverse, that your company is an inclusive space where you do encourage employees to form employee resource groups if they don't already exist, and think about like what that looks like in terms of incorporating that into the company culture. I think that once those things are included within a company, then everyone feels like they're being treated equally, they're being heard, and they can ultimately bring their whole self to work. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I don't think it's necessarily at like the product level. It's something that's a company-wide initiative, and everyone needs to be included in order to make progress.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we are going to wrap up here. Aditi, V, Yvette, Christian, you guys have been fantastic. We have appreciated all of your perspectives. Thank you for spending an hour with us. And Heather, thank you to you and the PLA for creating this opportunity to have this conversation.
Do I still sound like a robot? Yay!
No.
Great news. Kidding. Thank you so much. Amazing panel, really inspiring, and I think everyone will have lots of takeaways to take back and apply to their organization. So thank you, Tiama, for steering the ship, and thank you to all of you for joining us. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for having us. This was great.
Thank you,
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.